Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Our next guests are featured here every month on the third Thursday of every month at 11 a.m. Dr. Michele Sherwood is a trained doctor of osteopathy, and Dr. Mark Sherwood is a trained naturopathic doctor, former NFL player, MMA champion, 5,000 degree belt, in every aspect of self-defense, and won the heart of a doctor of osteopathy who was competitive herself. But Mark and Michele used an integrated approach that focuses on prevention and lifelong wellness. The Sherwoods have a thriving medical practice, the Functional Medical Institute, and are recognized experts in health and wellness. In their 18 years of practice, they've helped almost 8,000 patients worldwide with an annual reach of over 1.3 million. Together, they've offered 3 books: Fork Your Diet, Master the 4 Fundamentals of Good Health, Surviving the Garden of Eden, Surprising Biblical Insights to Enjoy Optimal Health, and The Quest for Wellness, a practical and personal wellness plan for optimum health in your body, mind, emotions, and spirit. You can find out more at their website at fmidr.com. Here to talk about the destructive behaviors that derail optimal health, and something that I'm sure that you will be on the edge of your seat, because what we're going to talk about today is about your gut. And eating in the COVID season and the holiday season has triggered for many the compounding of maladies related to digestion and to what's going on inside their body that are to be spoken at a whisper, but we are going to broadcast it loudly across the world. Mark and Michele, welcome to your edition of this Wellness Hour that we spend with you each month.
Thanks for having us again, and we appreciate it. Merry Christmas to everyone as well. It's a great time of year to talk about gut health, because we throw gut bombs in our bodies on a frequent basis. It is very cultural, and that's problematic. And of course, as you said, Rabbi Eric, the quarantine COVID situation has prompted great stress, comfort eating, again with more gut bombs that are literally blowing holes in our systems. So hence we have this this process that's all too common today, that the majority of people in the world have this thing called leaky gut.
Yes. So what is leaky gut? As we know, the intestinal tract is covered with these little finger-like projections called villi. And those villi, if you look at those villi under a microscope, those villi have absorptive surfaces. They're kind of like fingers. They absorb things, nutrients, and they are connected to one another by what's called tight junctions. And those tight junctions create a barrier from the outside to the inside and prevent things that shouldn't come across the villi into the bloodstream. It keeps them out. Now, when somebody develops leaky gut, it just so happens that those villi get weak and those tight junctions break down, and then large proteins or foreign substances are allowed to be absorbed into the system, which then, of course, the immune system is going to go on the attack and create antibodies to these foreign proteins to keep them out. So that can set the system up for what's called systemic inflammation or autoimmune diseases that start spinning out of control. Hashimoto's, psoriasis, rheumatoid, and the list goes on.
It's probably, a good analogy that people can catch is this, like leaky gut is the analogy of a toll booth that's supposed to stop cars and collect. But in this analogy, the toll booth is blown out and everything's coming through, and your state highway patrol is trying to stop everybody. That's like the immune system going on this all-out alarm that too many things are coming through, too many things are getting inside. And so this idea of leaky gut, it creates a big problem, and it gives the birth to the multitude of autoimmune conditions that we see today, that are so prevalent that we used to not see 75, 50 years ago. And a lot of times, even though there's about 100 autoimmune conditions that now we have names to, there's probably more, maybe 500 more that we don't, and we're never going to discover. But just know this, when one has autoimmunity, the leading cause of that is this phenomenon called leaky gut, and we'll talk about in a minute, obviously, what causes that. But the idea of autoimmunity is to not fall for the trap that say, well, I just have autoimmune thyroid disease. If you have autoimmunity, you've got autoimmunity, and that means everything. Your whole system is upside down. Your immune system has been compromised, and hence we have a problem, as we say.
You know, we hear about probiotics, we hear about antibiotics, we hear about prebiotics. So fiber, introducing fiber, a prebiotic in the form of fiber. You don't get enough fiber in your diet, you take a fiber supplement, and that's called a prebiotic. It has no chemistry to it, it's just soluble fiber to help move through your system. So how do we determine a healthy gut? I mean, do I always have bloating? No. Are there certain foods I react to that cause a gastrointestinal response? My rule is the first time it happens, I don't know if it's what it was. The second time it happens, I know what it is. I don't eat it anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? I might like it, but I'm not going to eat it. But there's so much talk about yogurt. I'm a non-dairy person. In almost my virtual existence is non-dairy. Eastern Europeans were in the parts of the world that we came from. We didn't have dairy, and we weren't farmers. We were so. I've never had a glass of milk in my life. I've never had a bowl of cereal with milk in my life. The concept of drinking an animal's milk, it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's not. I'm a human being. I'm not a cow. So, I'll have, like if somebody's serving cheese and crackers, I might have one or two, but I'm not I'm just not drawn to that. So every time somebody tells me that they want me to eat yogurt, if you're prescribed an antibiotic, which that is not very often, that this would offset because your antibiotics are non-discriminatory. Right? They're just all-out killers. They don't distinguish between good bacteria and bad bacteria. There's no intelligence to an antibiotic. It's just poison to bacteria, and there's good bacteria, and there's bad bacteria. How much bacteria at any given time is in my bloodstream, in my body, and hiding out in my organs?
Well, this is interesting because a lot of people, I'm going to share with you some facts right now that will probably be mind-blowing. Our human DNA, individuals, are 99.9% identical. We are 96% identical to a chimpanzee. And we also have, probably a 50% similarity with plants. So that goes back to the idea that we're created from the same dirt, right? There's a DNA commonality. Now, of all of the amount of DNA, human DNA we have in our body, we have 100 times more bacterial DNA. So if you look at that, it makes one ask the question, are we more bug, bacteria, than human? And we are constructed of more bacterial DNA, so therefore we're predominantly bacteria oriented as in our being. Now, with that said, 99% identical with human DNA, 90% different from an individual to individual of bacterial DNA. So the fascinating thing is that even though, Dr. Michele and I are married, we would have more common bacteria than perhaps not 10%. But for most people, it's 90% at least different. That's why we all break down foods and have different responses to different things. And that's why the macronutrient concept and the calorie concept can't work. It's not accurate. Is it a measure? Yes. But with that said, within that bacteria, you mentioned prebiotics, probiotics, but there's something we'll introduce today called postbiotics. So prebiotics would be fibers coming in, and remember that if this is a tube, like up here to, the other end, this is a tube, it's more acidic here, it's more alkaline as you go south, as we say. So there's probiotics that would include soluble and insoluble fiber. They feed the
prebiotics.
Those are prebiotics. They feed the probiotics. And the probiotics create postbiotics. So these are the products of the fermentation down in the colon. So as we go south, we get more postbiotics produced. And those would be propionate, butyrate, acetate. So if you don't have good gut sort of bacteria and all this stuff is not right, and you don't get the postbiotic produced, specifically butyrate is responsible for maintaining the tight junctions, to maintain the gut function, to the villi, as my wife likes to demonstrate, the little villi, maintain their integrity and the barrier integrity. So if you don't have all that going right, don't get enough fiber, that tells you you're not going to have enough butyrate to create the barrier. And that's why that the majority of people, because of, in part, the lack of fiber intake, and the average fiber intake for the American is probably 18 to 20 grams a day, and you need more like 50, 40 to 50. So some of our ancestors probably had 100. So, we are suffering, and to answer your question, how do you know? You kind of, don't want to be gross, but you almost have to become a poop inspector. Look at it. I mean, not to be weird, but if it's not fully formed, something's wrong. Something's very wrong. And if it's not regular, something's wrong. So if there's constipation, that's not right. And if there's liquefaction, that's not right. And if it's not fully formed, that's not right. So that's just a down and dirty way to sort of, say, is it not right? Obviously, gas and bloating would be part of that as well.
Right. Your intestinal tract doesn't really have a voice. The only voice that it has is gas and bloating, diarrhea, or malformed stools. So we have to kind of look at all the signs and symptoms around gut health to evaluate whether or not it's healthy.
And there's
what scripture do you have to back that up?
Well, I think when you look at that, you go back to Noah jumping off of his boat, right? And so here's Noah jumping off the boat, and God tells him what to eat. Right? And you go back even before that to the garden, it was plants, right? Plants. And then now he adds a little bit of, sort of these meat products, let's say, at that point. And remember, if we go back to the very concept of plants, what do plants consist of? Fiber. And so that's all we were eating for so long. And all of a sudden now we have this phenomena of processed foods that has, not only low fiber, but zero nutrients. So I think that whole concept is throughout as a theme of what we're supposed to eat, and then we've transitioned away from that. I mean, I kind of call that the Noah principle, if you will. There's what Noah was given. He was in charge of kind of repopulating the earth, and obviously if our genes have changed 2% in 10,000 years, we probably have the same genes as he did. And so why wouldn't that work for us? Well, it does. We just don't do it, so that's probably part of the issue.
So if you recall, and I brought this up with you before because it was the most fascinating TED presentation I had ever seen. And the topic, and it's probably now an 8-year-old, maybe even a 10-year-old TED teaching. But this medical doctor, she was an immunologist or infectious disease or something that had studied bacteria and determined that bacteria communicate with each other, and that the body has this level of a balance level when you're healthy of bacteria. You're a host for multiple types of flora and fauna and all the gut bacteria that help break down lactose and all those to emulsify and to process and distribute. But then you have an injury, a wound, and there's the bacteria communicating and saying, hey boys, let's gather together over here, and the bacteria mobilizes directly to that location. That becomes an infection, and her premise or hypothesis is that we are killing using antibiotics. Because they're intelligent, they're figuring out ways to avoid in the bloodstream. Oh, this is coming down. I recognize it because I know what food looks like. I know what protein looks like. I know what the various parts of the chemistry are, and that's not one of them. So I'm going to go over here and hide out in a place where there's low blood flow, and it's not going to get to me. And while I'm there, I'm going to call my friends and say, guys, there's a new attack. We got to figure out a way to do this. And so they come up with a new defense mechanism, and we consider that to be I'm trying to think of the word for when like COVID has started out as
antibodies.
It started out as one. Now there's 6 different, as it is. What do they call that?
Mutation or strain.
Mutation. Okay, so they get together and they figure out a mutation that's going to render this antibiotic ineffective. And so our premise is we should not be treating people with antibiotics. We should be treating people with medications that send out a jamming signal to the bacteria that says, nothing going on here, nothing to see here, keep on moving, keep on doing your job, nothing's happening, no need to call the friends, we'll let you know your friends are all okay, and jam the communication system of the bacteria.
Yeah.
A brilliant, just an absolute brilliant concept. Now, I've seen no pharmaceutical company working on this, but I'm sure that in the background that somebody's working on it, because to get to that level of a TED presentation, it's got some teeth, and I'm sure that there was funding that comes, you get to that, it's for the purpose of getting exposure and funding. So now I look at the gut. My gut is the same as your gut, is the same as everybody's gut. We are created by the same creator, and we have gut chemistry. We have gut bacteria, and it's for the purpose of breaking down and distributing and calling waste and good, and it's got discernment. It's a discerning bacteria, and each one has its role and function as to what it's going to distribute as it processes what I put in it. And so we come out of as a baby, and some process milk. My granddaughter couldn't process milk. She could only process soy. Why she's dairy sensitive. It's my adopted daughter. It's not genetic, but the child has my hair and my feet, so that there's a God at work. And my daughter and I look identical. So you know that there's some things going on in God's creation. So if we have basically the same gut chemistry, then we have absolute authority over how we treat. So is leaky gut, which is not, I don't think there's an ICD-10 code for leaky gut.
It's called IBS.
IBS.
Irritable bowel syndrome. All right. But many people suffer from this.
Yeah.
Is it all self-inflicted?
That's a great question.
Is it all self-inflicted?
Our opinion would be yes, based upon two concepts. Number one, we do know knowledge and we rebel. And number two, unknowingly, we're exposed to things that create leaky gut. So I think that, that we must not get into the self-blame all the way, and shame, of course, that's not going to do any good. But there are compounds that are in our food supply chain that create this permeability of the gut. Just a few of them, and they will. It doesn't matter who you are, these things will create permeability. Gluten is one of them. Gliadin is one of them. So therefore all the wheat products do. The corn and these genetic modified substances do. Soy, of course, is that. Anytime you put in these fried foods, processed food, sugars, those will. Within the production of our grains, they are sprayed with Monsanto's infamous product Roundup that has glyphosate and atrazine, so those will cause it. And some people even, Rabbi Eric, will consume these things and they'll look for symptoms and signs. But this is fascinating. I was listening to some stuff the other day that only 1 in 8 people will actually feel the symptoms of this phenomena immediately. And so that leaves 7 of 8 kind of thinking, well, this doesn't bother me. But then long term, the resiliency of both your immune system and your gut permeability will decrease, and therefore you have more problems that sort of generate and go on over time. So, I think that there's a couple things, and I just gave you a list of foods that create that. Now, again, the rebellion part comes in where people say, well, I'm just not going to stop it. Well, I can't help you there. You're just choosing to do that, even though we've told you otherwise. And the other school is, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Now I have an opportunity to quit or sort of reduce my exposure, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, all constitutions are not created equal. We look at genetics. Not everybody produces the enzyme to break down lactose, milk sugar. And the same is going to be true for other digestive components like hydrochloric acid and lipase and the other amylase, the other enzymes that are breaking down food. So leaky gut may actually show up in someone sooner, quicker, younger if they have these constitutional insufficiencies. So that's, where a functional medicine practitioner can come into play and do some deep diagnoses, the deep look into allergy testing, deep look into stool testing, deep look into organic acid testing to see where the insufficiencies might lie to help the person get out of their own way. So sometimes they're creating a problem that they don't even really know that they're actually contributing to because they have a constitutional weakness.
And this is fascinating too. You talked about earlier the communication process of these bacteria. That's crazy. Now we think that this up here in our brain is the main hub of everything. This is called the first brain, and it's interesting that we're sort of coining this term that the GI system is their second brain. However, the brain down here sends 8 times more signals back up here than this sends to that. So where is the primary brain? I would submit the consideration must be given to this this microbiome situation, this family of bacteria that uniquely lives in us as the host, in us and on us and around us. And so, people, tend to think depression is all a brain issue. No, depression is a gut issue. So it's like this communication definition certainly must be revisited from a reconsideration standpoint based upon all that we're starting to understand at the moment.
So hunger triggered by a glycemic marker, my blood sugar level drops to a certain level that needs to be replenished. Is that one of the...
That is definitely one of the triggers. If insulin, the hormone that manages blood sugar, is a long-acting hormone and it's staying around, it's going to pull blood sugar down relatively quickly because sugar is toxic in the bloodstream at certain levels. But if insulin is still hanging around, it's going to pull that blood sugar down and it's going to send somebody back to the refrigerator. So definitely getting your glycemic index, that carbohydrate load, under control is going to be one way to manage hunger. Now, there are certain people that have what's called the MC4R gene. We call it the death by buffet gene. These are individuals that cannot feel the full signal. So they have a tendency to be hungry and eat all the time. There are satiation hormones like leptin. There are hunger hormones like ghrelin. And if we get an imbalance in these hormones, leptin, for example, works much like insulin when we develop insulin resistance. Leptin is made in the fat cells. The more fat we get, the more leptin is produced. Leptin is designed to send a satisfaction signal to the brain. But if leptin is overproduced, much like if insulin is overproduced, the body gets resistant to that hormone signal, leptin. So the brain can no longer hear that signal of satiety. So those individuals have chronic cravings.
Well, and I think too, to tag onto that, the idea of the glycemic response for each food is different really for each of us because of the differences in the microbiome. So you could eat a carrot, I could eat a carrot, Dr. Michele could eat a carrot. It's going to produce different levels of blood sugar. And this has been proven in recent studies by people wearing these CGM, or these continual glucose monitors that sort of pay attention to the variability of these foods. And then you also have the ability of the body to produce blood sugar, needing insulin, when we produce a lot of cortisol. That's stress. So, cortisol is a glucocorticoid. So we've got all this stuff that we talk about, and it's interesting how when one goes to their PCP and they have stomach pains or gas or IBS, well, they're going to go to the gastroenterologist. But the gastroenterologist is not going to talk to the PCP, and the gastroenterologist is not going to talk to the neurologist. The neurologist is not going to talk to the cardiologist, and then endocrinologist. Well, they're not going to talk. So we've isolated the systems here into different little bitty silos. But the body doesn't work like that. Everything is sort of communicative and interdependent. It's not independent.
So if you know that things aren't working right and you don't make a change, these are choices. And when I look at the number of people who are in the healthcare system with complications. Now, I was an unlicensed pharmacist in college. I was drank, smoked, did all those, ate red meat, did all those terrible things. But I just recently did a life expectancy assessment. And based on my 94-year-old mother and her lifestyle and my father's age and what he died from. They're saying between 96 and 100 years is what my life expectancy is. So I know that the early years can be reversed, and that you can, because your cells die, all of them. I mean, you have what's the turnover? 100% turnover rate takes how long?
Well, it depends on what tissue or organ you're talking about. They're all different. Like you would think, like in the epithelium here, these are turning over every 48 hours or so. And then you look at maybe a red blood cell every 4 months, a white blood cell maybe every 6 months. So it varies. But what you're talking about is the ability of the body to repair.
Right, but there's a point which you reach the summation of all those things. Right? Do I have a new body every twice a year?
I mean, there are some things that do not turn over. Like we don't get new nerve cells and we don't get new muscle cells. But it's thought that every 7 years things completely turn over, and you've got what you've been doing for the last 7 years has now come to fruition.
Okay, so it's a very good. See, these are benchmarks that our audience can understand. Is that okay? I can look at my last 7-year pattern, and when I made my change in November 2019, where I told you I administered a GOYB protocol, get off your butt. And went from 4 minutes of exercise a day, sum total based on the monitor of my watch, 4 minutes of exercise a day, to now 120 minutes of total exercise a day, standing minutes, 10,000 steps, the 3 to 5 miles every day, and have been faithful to that. With a targeted 600 calorie extra burn on top of whatever your passive energy or your base metabolic rate is. And, I've lost about 25% of my body mass and have lean body mass, and have supplemented with not working out but using bands. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not going to ride a bicycle. Just you reach 69 years old, you know what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, and you're only fooling yourself if you think you're going to do it. But bands I can do. I can put them on a door, and I can do the resistance training, and I can do the squats and the toning, because I'm not looking to be.
We're too high maintenance. Don't do that.
Right. An NFL player, but every 7 years is when this system begins to kind of give you, all right, if you want to know why you're where you are, review the last 7 years, because that's how you got here.
Yes.
And if that's the case, how long does it take to reverse 7 years? All depends on your intensity and your commitment to a routine. I believe I've reversed the numerics. I don't know that I've fully reversed the damage, but I'm on the path to restoring whatever damage there might have been done. We're talking with Drs. Michele and Dr. Mark Sherwood, an osteopath and a homeopath, married couple at the Functional Medical Institute, fmidr.com. And they are with us on the third Thursday of every month in the 11 o'clock hour for the wellness hour. Just wellness, how you as a believer can biblically align your lifestyle with what God defines as wellness for you, what you eat, what you do. You weren't meant to be sedentary. You weren't meant to sit on a couch. You were meant to be up and around and physically functional. And there's things you can do to strengthen what has become weak over time based on your behaviors and genetics, which have been passed down. There's that nature versus nurture. There are things that are genetically predisposed to that you can feed or you can starve, and you need to become aware of that if you want to age gracefully. And I think all of us have defined dignity, living our lives out with dignity, meaning that in our latter years, we don't want somebody to have to feed us. We want to be able to take care of ourselves. The time to make that plan and that decision is not at 80 or 90. A plan has to be in place much earlier than that. I put my plan in place at age 68. That seems rather late, but the benefits have been quick to come, and the blood chemistry shows that there has been a positive response to the changes that I've made. And they are not radical changes. It's just becoming aware of some of the things you do and what works and what doesn't work. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue and talk about some of the long-term issues related to not paying attention to this leaky gut syndrome that many of you suffer with and don't realize that you've been indoctrinated, that you have allergies, or that you have intolerances, or that you have this or you have that. The truth of the matter is you have whatever God says you have, and you need to go on a deep dive to examine what He says and how you line up with what He says. And you are an active participant in this partnership with the Lord in trying to give you the body and the health that He has designed for you. We're going to take a short break, and we will be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs Michele and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com, or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on this Thursday of every month, we meet with Drs Michele and Mark Sherwood in the 11 o'clock hour to talk about wellness, biblical wellness. Yes, God has a plan for wellness, and the quest for wellness, Fork Your Diets, Surviving the Garden of Eden, and all of the resources found at fmidr.com are available to you, as well as their weekly podcast and blogs and information, consultations, and recommendations that will help change your life. Mark and Michele, welcome back.
Thank you again. This is we always enjoy it with you. Thank you so much.
So we know that foods are directly related to particular inflammation, and I want to put it in that category because in the last 10 years we've come to find out that inflammation is the enemy. Mm-hmm. So in the past, arthritis, well, that was the enemy, and brittle bone, and all these. But inflammation, the things that cause inflammation are really what, and I guess the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the NSAIDs, took off in the marketplace. The Advil, the Motrins, the Naprosins, all the things that people are using as an anti-inflammatory are only masking because the foods they're eating. And so we know that corn has been linked to arthritis for many years. And so, what is it that's so unique about corn? Well, corn happens to be an inflammatory it's an inflammatory stimulant in many people's bodies. That is the reaction to it. And so when we start to examine and boil it down as you have done, we're looking at anti-inflammatory foods as opposed to foods that cause internal organic inflammation. And that's the enemy. Food's not the enemy. Inflammation and what triggers the inflammation is the enemy. So we have to become aware of what causes and how our own, each person's body. I could eat 12 ears of corn raw on the cob, cooked on the cob, and it would have absolutely no effect on me whatsoever. It would fulfill the biblical statement, the same thing I told my daughter when she swallowed a dime, this too shall pass. And so,
That's good.
We know that not all, but Paul said it. He said, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial.
That's right.
So when we look at pork and shellfish, which were Levitically unclean, and we look at gout, and we look at purines, we look at a direct correlation between pork and shellfish and purines, which then flow to the lowest joint, gather, crystallize, cause an inflammation, and now you have this, I think that big toe is the fourth or fifth most replaced joint. You would know this, Michele, that big toe joint replacement is a pretty common surgery because of the rat tooth effect of the inflammation that leaves almost these, looks like lines that a rat has been eating away. How do I know? Because I used to be a gout sufferer, and when I stopped, I had the choice, take allopurinol for the rest of my life or stop eating pork and shellfish. I stopped eating pork and shellfish, but you still have the damage, residual damage. So I can look and I can see the teeth marks which are left. And they told me, had I continued, the inflammation was so bad that I would become a candidate for a big toe joint replacement. I said, this is unheard of. I've never heard of such a thing. They said, oh, you got knees, you got hips, you got shoulders, and big toes. Those are like right up there in the top joint replacement. And I'm thinking, I've never known a person that's had a big toe joint. But these are the things that happen when you have a constant intake of inflammatory food products.
Yes.
Exactly. So when you look at inflammation as the general term, inflammation is a response from our immune system, and in normal function we have to have a proper inflammatory response or we would die from a cut on our finger. Now, when it becomes overwhelmed, and the analogy and good way to understand it is this: if the immune system was like our fire department, and our fire department response was like the immune system kicking out inflammation. So here's the fire department goes out after being called to the scene, they put out the fire, they go back, and they clean out the truck, they redo their gear, whatever, and they get ready to go again. That's normal inflammatory response. But if the fire department was called from one scene to the other all the time, they would be wore out over time, and therefore you would have chronic systemic upregulated inflammation, and then it becomes a negative. And the things that drive our immune system to kick out this inflammatory response would be characterized as inducers. So inducers are anything that sort of created inside or brought in from the outside, endogenous or exogenous. And some of the inducers, the majority of them are found in our world, and many of them in our food supply. And what makes corn, for example, become, generally speaking, inflammatory is because not in its original state was it inflammatory, because God made that. But when mankind got involved and said, let me see if I can modify it to make it grow faster, thicker, quicker, to create profit, and let me see if I can make it resistant to herbicides and pesticides, and I don't let the soil rest, and all this production sort of manipulation that we've done, that's what takes something that God made it's good for us, that it's a grain, it could be some good fiber, and turns it into something that's quite dangerous for us. So it's not really, like even grains in general, like wheat, as people say, well, Jesus ate wheat, he's the bread of life. Well, this is fascinating, and I want to share this truth that it's hit me the other day. If Jesus is the bread of life, and we know that, figuratively, literally, whatever, and we look at today that grains are used to sustain life as a population. So we've manipulated earthly bread, earthly grains to sustain life, but those things have become disease-causing once we started messing with the food chain. So isn't it interesting that the very thing that we use today to sustain life is a substitution for the real bread of life, the grains that Jesus ate and what he represents? So, the devil's about substitution. He can't create. He's about substitution. And so he has fooled us to believe that, these substitutes are going to provide nourishment for our bodies, but they bring about death. And a lot of the people that we see, all of us have experienced leaky gut. That phenomena doesn't kill you, but it takes away life. And isn't that what the devil does? He takes away this idea of abundant life, as you mentioned earlier. So I think that's the real key thing to understand here, that all these foods, when they're in their original package, are fine. But when they get in their adapted package or adjusted or modified package that we did, a lot of them become not fine. And so that's sort of a good way to remember the analogy. If you can't picture it being in the garden, like there was no French fry bushes, there's no donut trees, there was no milk stream, as you mentioned, we're not cows, and it's pretty obvious that what we're supposed to do, and also pretty obvious what we're not supposed to do. But we get confused with erroneous information that's thrown at us every day like a propaganda mill.
Yeah, well, and the denaturation of it, like you mentioned, corn, it's not always just corn. Corn, of course, is a high allergen.
Yeah.
but it's the adulteration of the corn into this thing called high fructose corn syrup. And therein lies a substance that is in a good share of our processed foods. And people are drinking it in drinks, they're drinking it in pops, it's in, you know, all of the packaged foods, and it's the number one cause of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So it's...
I have we only have 3 minutes left, and I have this critically important question for you.
Yes.
For those of us that love chocolate, for those of us that have a sweet tooth, what do you do?
What addiction?
You eat your chocolate. You know, you get a good quality 85-90% chocolate, and you eat that. It's not a bad thing because God made that, right? It's you want to avoid the milk chocolate and avoid anything of a dopamine sort of hit. If that drives you, if you can't put it down and it owns you, that's addiction. If you can have a bite of chocolate with the enjoyment of the sweet and a good substance because it's got antioxidants in it, it's got some magnesium in it, that's good, right? But if it becomes something that owns you, it's like alcoholism. It becomes addiction. So just be careful with that as just run it through your filter of what is addiction and what's freedom. And that's the answer. You know, sweet tooth is great. Chocolate's great. Dark chocolate's just fine.
Okay. And as we enter the holiday season and people are still socially distanced, but they're have these old family recipes and in this 7-year period, is it all based on repetitive behaviors, or are intermittent behaviors as toxic as repetitive behaviors?
So the answer is it depends on the resiliency of the system. As we age, the resiliency goes down. We can tolerate things earlier in life from the occasional. So the more we've been repetitive over time, it drains it down, the tolerance level goes down, and that's why we age, the system gets less able to deal with the barrage of things and recover. Hence you get this immunocompromised state, sicker longer, sicker more often, slower recovery.
Interesting topic that it's a matter of fact, from a spiritual perspective, it's really not what you're eating, it's what's eating you. And
yes,
when you ultimately look at the things of the natural versus the things of the supernatural, again, what you're eating winds up eating you. What you're thinking winds up eating you. So it is a vicious cycle of bad thinking, bad actions, and that's compounding of it, that the body is the temple of the Lord, and we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, and so we try not to defile them. But to me, it's always amazing to me to see, as I walk down the street, you do not see a lot of 95-year-old, 400-pound people.
Right.
Sadly, but true, obesity is the fastest growing non-communicable disease process in the entire world. That's the real pandemic right there.
Well, it's unfortunate, and God wants you to be well, but you have to be not just a hearer of the word, but a doer of the word, and that applies to this very topic. And pay attention and find. If a gastroenterologist is not a leaky gut guy, if a homeopath is not well trained in leaky gut, who do I go to? Or do I just go, or do I just go to my refrigerator and do a self-examination?
Exactly. Look at your poop, make a decision, and go to the refrigerator and make more decisions. Throw out the things that are garbage, just like your body's supposed to do, and keep the things that are life-giving, just like our body does.
Amen. Amen. Mark and Michele, we wish you happy holidays, a wonderful new year. We look forward to you joining us next year as we launch season 5 of Revealing the Truth, and we're excited to have you as a part of it. We appreciate all you have been to us during the course of this year, and we look forward to a wonderful new year with you and exciting new understanding of God's design for wellness, optimal wellness in our bodies, minds, and spirits. So God bless you both. Happy holidays to you. We look forward to seeing you in the coming year.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
All right, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.